Hello, my name is Laura Duclos, and this is my final research project for my editing class at Texas Tech University. Today I'll be discussing the differences between Buzzfeed and the Huffington Post. So like any research project, you need a thesis statement. So mine kind of goes along the lines of an analysis between the way Buzzfeed and Huffington Post cover events such as news, lifestyle, and media trends reveals subtle but effective differences between sources that reach specific audiences. What I found most interesting, though, is how I noticed BuzzFeed originally started out as this fun-loving, viral video media source and quickly transformed itself into a credible breaking news source. Whereas Huffington Post, on the other side, got its start in politics and news, and has been trying to turn its brand into something that's more user, aka millennial-friendly. Before we get into the analysis, though, let's look at some history so that way you can have some background and context. Let's start with the Huffington Post. They were founded in May of 2005 by a political activist named Arianna Huffington, MIT graduate Jonah Peretti, and former America Online executive Kenneth Lehrer. The Huffington Post was originally created as the liberal alternative to the Drudge Report, which, for those of you who didn't have weird essays in high school in their political classes, the Drudge Report is a conservative news website that covers everything in the spectrum from news and information to entertainment. By April of 2011, the Huffington Post was the sixth largest news website in the United States. So now let's move on to BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed was established in 2006 as a viral lab that tracked viral content. However, they now describe themselves as a social news and entertainment company to provide its audience with the most shareable breaking news, original reporting, entertainment, and video. BuzzFeed was founded by Jonah Peretti and Kenneth Lehrer. Wait a second. Let's go back to those last two guys. Do they sound familiar to you? Hopefully, because I said their names about 30 seconds ago. Jonah Peretti and Kenneth Lehrer were both founders of the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed. That sounds a little bit strange, right? So let's take a second to look a little bit more into that. BuzzFeed was founded in 2006 as purely a viral lab, like I said earlier. Now, to be honest, I kind of don't know what that is, but after scouring websites and websites and websites for hours upon hours, all I could find was that BuzzFeed seemed to be a side project for those Huffington Post founders. But they left to work for BuzzFeed full-time whenever Huffington Post was sold to AOL in 2011 for $315 million. This was something that really piqued my interest because when I see both websites, I see something similar and even decided to do this project because to me they were both something that I found to be like the other. And there's tons of times that the Huffington Post has even referenced BuzzFeed in their articles, so I just found it to be super interesting that they were actually founded by the same people because it makes sense. It's one of those things that just clicks. So now that all of the history's over, let's go ahead and analyze the two of them. BuzzFeed, of course, dominates social media, and I think that the only way you wouldn't know that is if you had absolutely zero social media accounts, and even then, you still might know about BuzzFeed. However, Huffington Post is the front runner on the old school way of doing things, which is actually typing in the website, going to it, and clicking the article. And looking at it that way. So after learning all of this, I took myself to the best media guru I could find here at Texas Tech University and talked to Lisa Lowe for a little bit to see what she thought of everything.
Well, let's just be honest. It's the quizzes, the off-color quizzes, the fun, lighter stuff that millennials consume like, wildfire. That explains the traffic. I think you still would look to HuffPo for, and they'll give you whatever you want. If you want entertainment, if you want gossip, they've got that. If you want hardcore politics, they've got that. I always liked the blogging side of the HuffPo, and I follow quite a few bloggers. But those two organizations, just kind of battling it out. They're never going to be a CNN or a Time or a Fox or MSNBC or something like that. But I think they're just duking it out to get that entertainment, that those repeat visits is what's happening, and that you see that evolution on almost all social media media platforms. In particular, one starts out one way and they basically turn their backs on what worked and they try to mimic another platform, and you see that all the time. They want to stay relevant, and they understand that the millennial target is very important. Millennials consume a lot of media, you want to get that viewership so that as they grow and change life cycles, get married, have children, you want to get that loyalty in terms of consumption.
Okay, so in the month of March, BuzzFeed received 286 0.6 million hits. And that was just in 1 month alone, whereas Huffington Post only received 67.6 million. However, when it came down to time, the average user on Buzzfeed spent about 3.5 minutes on the site, whereas the average Huffington Post user spent about 4.5. What's even more interesting, though, is that in that 3.5 minute period that the Buzzfeed user was on the site, they looked at almost 4 different articles of content, such as video, quizzes, news articles, what have you. And the Huffington Post user only looked at about 2. To cap that all off, 41% of BuzzFeed users were returning users who kept going through the site after looking at that first one, whereas 60% of the Huffington Post users were returning visitors to the site. So although BuzzFeed may have hundreds of millions more hits than Huffington Post, the Huffington Post has users that seem to truly read their articles and spend their time on the site. So I'll let you decide for yourself which one is better. Actually, while you're making up your mind, I'll let you see a couple of clips of what students and faculty had to say when I went around campus to ask them which one they looked at more.
I look at Buzzfeed more because it's on Snapchat.
I look at both of them every day.
Okay,
both
what?
of them. Huffington Post and BuzzFeed, they're just kind of different. You know, I really like BuzzFeed for like the culture stuff, but Huffington Post is a little bit better for news. But they have some good culture stuff too.
Definitely BuzzFeed. I follow them on Instagram.
I don't get either of those.
Huffington Post.
Why is that?
I've never even heard of BuzzFeed.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it depends on what I'm doing. I research BuzzFeed a lot for content for my classes because I teach digital and social media, so I'm always interested in what millennials are consuming. But for news, I would tend, for personal consumption, I would tend to go to the HuffPo.
So sometimes Huffington Post, but mostly BuzzFeed.
Okay.
Just because they have the quizzes and all the fun little stuff and videos.
What's the Huffington Post BuzzFeed?
You don't know what either of those are?
I don't know what they are. No, I don't.
You don't look at either of them?
Actually, I probably come across articles on the Huffington Post more. But it's hard to say.
What if I looked at neither?
That's fine.
Yeah, that one.
BuzzFeed.
Why?
Because, I mean, it's always flooded on my Facebook page, so I don't really do it on purpose. It's just always there.
BuzzFeed.
Okay, why?
It shows up more. I love Huffington Post.
Okay.
BuzzFeed.
Why?
Because it's usually what pops up in my Facebook page and it's a little bit more interesting.
So now let's look into social media presence. It's no question who dominates this territory, so let's start off with Twitter. On Twitter, BuzzFeed has over 30 verified accounts that include topics such as BuzzFeed College, BuzzFeed Style, BuzzFeed DIY, BuzzFeed Tasty, BuzzFeed Weddings, so many more than that. And Huffington Post has that too, but of their accounts, only 20 of them are verified, and they seem to have less of a following. On Instagram, I could find about 30 verified BuzzFeed accounts, whereas the Huffington Post only had about 10. So now we can move on to the biggest social media site of them all, Facebook. So let's start off with the Huffington Post. They have about 12 verified accounts and 5 more verified Canadian accounts, and their main page has around 6,767,000 likes. So when you think about BuzzFeed, it actually kind of blows my mind how much they kill the game on Facebook. They have about 46, give or take, accounts on Facebook. Their main page has about 6,989,000 likes. If you think that's a lot, you should check out their food, video, and news pages. 20,689,540 likes for a page about food is just absolutely mind-blowing. Personally, I look at both BuzzFeed and the Huffington Post on a daily basis and would actually love to work for either of those entities. It's pretty obvious to me that BuzzFeed slays the game on social media, but there's just something that I really do respect about the Huffington Post sticking to their guns and not completely rebranding themselves to be something like the stepchild of BuzzFeed. Huffington Post, to me, attracts those who are a little bit more serious about their news, but are also looking for some kind of an outlet where they can find lifestyle and entertainment news as well. BuzzFeed, and I do think it's safe to say this, targets millennials the most, but it affects anybody with an internet connection. Although they're working to become a more serious news outlet, I think, and I honestly kind of hope, that they continue to be the fun-loving infotainment news site that we continuously see on our Facebook feeds. So in conclusion, I believe that both outlets effectively reach their intended audiences and will continue to do well in the future. BuzzFeed, of course, will continue to grow at exponential rates, and I'm eager to see how much more seriously they are taken as a news source, because they've been working really hard on that, and their news coverage is really good. But I'm also very interested in seeing what Huffington Post is going to do to keep up with that, and to keep their users and visitors engaged on their websites. So thank you so much for watching my presentation. I really appreciate it, and I hope you learned something today.